First, if you take a photo of me, please do not put it in Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine. It does surveillance on its users and on everyone else on the internet. It uses face recognition, so if you put someone's photo into that company, you give it one more way to track that person. It's a nasty way to treat your friends, and it's a nasty way to treat me. Please don't do it to me. I'm taking care of it, but I have a glass of water that I put on top of the stack of plates. Oh, there it is. In fact, if someone could bring me some hot water, that would be nice. And also, please don't take a photo of me using a mobile device that has geolocation on. I don't want you giving data about where I am, or you shouldn't do that about anyone, actually. Second, if you want to make a recording of this talk and distribute copies, please distribute them only in the formats favorable to free software. Those are the OGG formats and the WebM format. Please don't distribute them in MP anything, because those are patented. Please don't distribute them in Flash. That requires non-free software to play. It's actually malware. I urge you not to have Flash player in your computer. And please don't distribute them in Windows Media Player, Real Player, or QuickTime. Also, please make sure that the normal use of the distribution site does not involve running any non-free software. This is the problem with YouTube. It distributes WebM format, which is good, but you can't even see it unless you run the non-free JavaScript code that it sends to the browser. And of course, you shouldn't run that code, and other people shouldn't run that code. So you shouldn't be leading them to run that code, which you would be if you post anything in YouTube. Also, please put on the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a presentation of a point of view. So, free software is a matter of freedom, not price. It's libre, not gratis. I don't mind if person A pays person B for a copy of a program. I don't see anything wrong in that. It's just a minor side issue anyway. What's important is, once person A has a copy of this program, does it respect person A's freedom or not? If it doesn't respect the freedom, it's a non-free program, and person A would be better off not having it at all, in my opinion, and I certainly won't take it, and I wish it didn't exist. So I'm careful to say gratis whenever I mean zero price, and thank you. And I reserve the word free for when it means freedom. So what's a program and what's a computer? Well, a computer is a conceptually simple, universal computing device. All it knows how to do is get the next instruction and execute it, and get the next and execute it, and so on, over and over. The instructions come from the program. So with the right program, you can make the same computer do anything. Well, there are some things it can't do yet. But the question is, who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's you, when really it's someone else. You might think your computer obeys you, when really it's obeying someone else primarily, and only obeys you when the other says it can. With any program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other, because there's no other way for it to be. When the users control the program, we call that free software. Why is this? What is freedom? Freedom is having control of your own life. Control of the activities that you do in your life. When you use a program to do the activity, that requires that you have control over that program. So, the program respects the user's freedom when the user has control of the program. In order for the users to have control of the program, they need the 4 essential freedoms. So those 4 freedoms are the concrete definition or criterion for free software. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish, for any purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the program's functioning and change it to do computing the way you wish. This requires having the source code. Here's some source code. As you can see, it looks sort of like text combined with math, and if you've learned programming, you can understand it, you can see what it does, and you can change it to do something else. To run this program, in many cases, we convert it to an executable. The executable is totally opaque. Programmers, even programmers can't understand what it does. If it's a trivial program, you can figure it out. But if it's non-trivial, figuring out what it does from the executable is tremendously hard. People only do that when it's absolutely necessary, which sometimes it is. So if we want the users in practical terms to have control of the program, they've got to get the source code. It's not enough to say, here's an executable, figure it out if you can. So, free software requires that users get the source code. These 2 freedoms give each user individually, separately, control of the program. Here we see 4 users. One of them is changing the program, and the other 3 are not. They're using it as they got it. Separate control means I can change my copies, and you can change your copies. But that's not enough, because most users are not programmers. They haven't learned how to understand source code. So if all they've got is separate control, they can't change it, not practically speaking. So we need collective control as well, which is the freedom to work with others in a group so as together to exercise control over that program and what it does. Here we see a group of 3 users working together to make the program do what they want. 2 of them are actually changing it. Evidently, they know how to program. The third one is not doing so. That person perhaps doesn't know how to program, but participates in the discussions in the group where they decide what changes to make. This is how non-programmers participate in control over the software. So people work together in this way when they want to. They don't have to. Here we see 2 other users that are not participating in that group. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they're happy with the program the way they got it. Maybe they don't get along with those 3, or those 3 don't get along with them. Who knows? The point is they're all free to cooperate with anyone else that wants to cooperate with them. Collective control requires 2 more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. These 2 freedoms make it possible for the people in the work to pass their modified versions back and forth, and then pass along those versions they got from others in the group to further members in the group. It also permits them to offer their versions to other users even to publish them, offering them to the general public. A part of these freedoms has a special moral importance, and that's when the distribution is non-commercial, because that's when it's sharing, and sharing is good, sharing is laudable. And this is why we must reject the propaganda terminology of the proprietary developers that want to demonize sharing. Terms like pirate. When they call people who share pirates, what they're really saying is that helping other people is the moral equivalent of attacking ships. Morally speaking, that's as false as it could be, because attacking ships is very bad, but sharing is good. So let's refuse to call them by the same word. Let's reject, on principle, calling sharing, quote, piracy, unquote. When people ask me what I think of piracy, I say attacking ships is very bad, let's send the Navy. When people ask me what I think of movie piracy, I say I like the first Pirates of the Caribbean. If they really want to hear about music piracy, I could sing the first verse of My Name is Captain Kidd. Any system designed to stop people from sharing, if it is a direct attack on community, it's antisocial, it's vicious. If any law to stop people from sharing and helping each other is lacking in moral authority. Are you trying to make a sign language communication to me? Somebody seems to be perhaps doing so, but I don't understand what it meant. Anyway, if the program comes with all 4 essential freedoms, it's free software, and the users control the program. But if any of these freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the users don't control the program. Instead, the program controls the users, and the developer controls the program, which means this program is an instrument of unjust power, power of the developer over the users. A non-free program is an injustice. A non-free program should not exist. When the developer, which is typically a company, meaning and usually a corporation, meaning a psychopath, has this kind of power over people, what's it going to do with that power? It's going to look for ways to use that power to push them even further down, gain more power over them, and more advantage over them. So the developers of proprietary software put in malicious functionalities to gain more at the expense of their own users. Sometimes they spy on people. For instance, iThings have a transmitter in them designed to enable them to be tracked. And there were stores that put in receiver sensors to track people as they walked around the store. Another spy functionality is in the Amazon swindle, which transmits the name of the book being read and the page number from time to time to Amazon. It also transmits any notes or underlining that the user enters. And then there are functionalities to restrict the user, to stop users from doing what, of course, everyone knows they're going to want to do. I'm not talking about missing features here. Of course, anybody could do less than one might have wished. That's not evil. That's just not living forever, right? The point is, although even omitting a feature is an evil in a proprietary program where the users are not allowed to add it for themselves. In a free program, You justify your omission by saying, I've done enough, now it's your turn. Add that feature you want. But the proprietary software developer is saying, no, I won't let you add it. That's why proprietary software itself is an injustice. But I'm not talking about omissions here. They worked for years to develop the code so that users won't be able to do certain things. Here, for instance, is the notorious blue ray that attacks users when they try to copy. It's a vicious thing. And since nobody has figured out free software to defeat the DRM of the Blu-ray discs, they are enemies of your freedom. Every time you see a Blu-ray disc, you should think those monsters are attacking me again. And never think of getting one or using one. Now, these malicious functionalities are known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. The perpetrators call it digital rights management. They're trying to put spin on it. Basically, you got to pick your spin one way or the other. If you call it digital rights management, you're siding with the perpetrators. And if you call it digital restrictions management, you're siding with the victims. I know which side I'm on, and you know too. You'll have to choose your side. And you can find DRM in many digital products. I think it should be a crime to implement DRM, but our government's on the wrong side. Then there are functionalities to attack the user. For instance, the Amazon swindle has a backdoor for remote erasure of books. This was discovered in 2009 when Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book in an Orwellian act. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. Which, if you've read 1984, is not very comforting. But it doesn't really matter because the promise was not serious. Amazon didn't intend to keep this promise. It was just to cause the criticism to lose momentum. Amazon has gone back to remotely erasing books whenever it thinks it can. Backdoors are found in many proprietary programs. For instance, there's a backdoor in Android and a backdoor in the iThings. Then there are products that are jails, that is, they impose censorship of applications. This was pioneered by Apple in the iPhone. For the first time, there was a general-purpose computer in which users were not free to install the application programs of their choice. They could only install what was approved by Apple. The users, when they found ways to bypass this censorship, which Apple practices in an almost arbitrary manner for political reasons, including as well as commercial advantage. When the users found ways to bypass it, they called it jailbreaking, in effect recognizing that those products were jails for their user. So that's our term for a product that censors applications. It's a jail. By the way, it appears that Apple is currently in the process of making it possible for individual users to get source code and compile it and install it in an iPhone. So maybe they're not jails anymore. But Microsoft imitated Apple, and Windows mobile devices are jails. Another form of sabotage was observed in the PlayStation 3. Initially, it was sold with two modes of operation. You could play games with Sony's gaming network, or you could install another operating system, such as the GNU+Linux operating system. Then someone figured out a way to break some DRM using gnu+linux, so Sony decided to take away that feature. Sony released a firmware downgrade which removed the functionality of running another operating system and said, okay, user, now you've got to choose. Either install the downgrade and lose the ability to run other systems, or don't install the downgrade and lose the ability to play on the gaming network because they had changed the protocol and the old firmware couldn't do it anymore. So each user was forced to choose to lose one functionality or the other. Of course, there's some people who would say that's okay because the user's got a choice. Like your money or your life. And then, for further sabotage, there are universal backdoors. That means through the back door they can remotely change the code. Windows has had a universal backdoor since Windows XP, which means that any malicious functionality that is not in Windows today could be remotely installed tomorrow. Microsoft did not admit that Windows XP had a universal backdoor, but people figured it out. However, you can measure the steady fall of ethical standards by the fact that Microsoft openly states that Windows 10 has a universal backdoor. There's also a universal backdoor in the Amazon swindle, in nearly all portable phones, and Android has something pretty close to a universal backdoor. In Google Play, there's a backdoor that allows Google to forcibly install any application. Now, I'm not sure whether that's 100% equivalent to a universal backdoor or not. But it's clearly no good. And then there's another kind of sabotage. Microsoft shows the NSA security bugs in Windows before it fixes them, thus giving the NSA a chance to attack people's computers. The news article I read describing this was entitled, "Can Anyone Ever Trust Microsoft Again?" Clearly not, because it's making proprietary software. So all the major proprietary operating systems have malicious functions, Flash Player, and many other programs. So nearly all users of proprietary software are victims of proprietary malware. I've already given you the proof of that. They don't do it because they're sadists, those developers. They do it because they can profit from it at their users' expense, and because they have no scruples to stop them. Now, any given proprietary program might or might not have malicious functionalities. But from our point of view, since we have no way of magically determining whether there are malicious functionalities in a particular program, there are two possibilities. Either we know about malicious functionalities in that program, or we don't know of any. If we don't know of any, there might be some or there might not. And there's no way to make sure. They won't let us study the source code, with rare exceptions. And in any case, if all you can do is study the source code, if the community can't maintain a version of it, we can't even be sure that the source code they showed us is the real source code of the executable that's running. So it's never possible to rationally trust a proprietary program. The only way to trust it is with blind faith. In other words, proprietary software is software for suckers. The The only way you can have rational confidence in a program is if it's free software. With free software, the users control the program, which means the users have a defense against malicious functionalities. They can see them in the source code and they can fix them. That is, remove the maliciousness and make a version which isn't malicious. Now, this is not a perfect defense. There are a few instances of free software with malicious functionalities. For instance, Ubuntu has a desktop search facility which snoops on the user and sends data to Canonical. And people have used our defense. People have made modified versions which don't snoop. But Canonical is still harming the reputation, the honor of our community. We should pressure Canonical to get rid of that snooping and do so as soon as possible. Please do not recommend Ubuntu. In addition, it's not entirely free software. But that's not egregious. The snooping is egregious. And the ethical standards of proprietary developers are so low that they have no shame about this. They used to feel some shame, as you can see from the fact that Microsoft didn't admit the spying functionalities or the universal backdoor in Windows XP. But in Windows 10, Microsoft proudly states that it can look at any file on the machine, that it has a universal backdoor. There are conferences where proprietary developers present their new clever ways of mistreating their users. So, for your freedom's sake, you should escape from proprietary software and come live in the free world that we have built with the GNU operating system together with the Linux kernel. These gave us a way to be free. I started developing the GNU operating system in January 1984. Oh boy, is there any way to block the sun up there? Or turn it off? Is there a sundial here?
You can stand on the other side of the table.
Well, the point is, I didn't stand there because I don't want to block your view of the projection.
But you're not right by the table. You're not blocking.
Oh, I see. Yeah, here, now I just have to reach the space key, but I think I can do it. Let's see. No, I'm just trying to see what I can do. Oh, it's a little closer now. I can reach it. Good. So, I developed the GNU system with the help of thousands of others, of course, to make it possible to use a computer in freedom. In 1983, when I planned and announced this project, it was impossible to do that. All the operating systems for modern computers were proprietary. Using one took away your freedom. Well, I knew a way I could change that. By writing another operating system, I could make a way to use a computer in freedom. Of course, I didn't plan on doing it all by myself. I decided to recruit others to help. And we developed many components. In some cases, I persuaded people, for instance, the developers of BSD, to release some of their code as free software. And then there were other projects like the X Windows system, which released free software for other motives of their own. They weren't particularly interested in making a free operating system, but their code was a useful contribution to one. In 1992, we had almost all of the GNU system. The main thing missing was the kernel. The kernel is the component of an operating system that allocates the computer's resources to the other programs you run. We started developing the kernel in 1990, but the design I chose was perhaps too advanced and elegant with a microkernel and multiple servers on top of that, and it took 6 years for the developer to get a test version. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait for that because in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had developed a proprietary kernel called Linux in 1991, liberated it. So in 91, Linux was proprietary because its license was too restrictive. It didn't permit commercial redistribution, if I remember right, and that's part of what's needed for free software. But in 92, he switched to a free license, and when Linux was free, people could fit it into the last gap in the GNU system, making a complete system, which was basically GNU together with Linux. In other words, it's the GNU plus Linux operating system. Please don't call the whole system Linux, because that means you're giving the credit for our work to somebody else and none of it to us. Please give us equal mention. We did start the whole thing. We developed the biggest contribution to the code. So I think equal mention is a fair thing for us to ask. If you say GNU plus Linux or GNU/Linux, then you're giving us equal mention. And you're also giving equal mention to Torvalds, whose component of the system is important. In addition, when people call the whole system Linux, and they call Torvalds' kernel Linux, that ambiguity confuses people terribly. Now, if you're a wizard, in each case you can figure out what is really at the issue, and you can tell what they should have said, what they're talking about. But anyone else is totally lost. But when you start calling the whole system GNU/Linux, and you call Torvalds' kernel Linux, people can tell which one you're talking about. You don't confuse them. GNU/Linux is basically a free operating system, but in practice, people who make distributions add a lot of other things, and sometimes some of them are non-free programs, and ethically that ruins it. Because in order for a collection of programs to respect your freedom, it's necessary that each piece in the collection respect your freedom separately. If there's one non-free piece in the collection, that trashes your freedom, and so the collection as a whole trashes your freedom. There are over 1,000 distributions of GNU/Linux. Nearly all of them contain non-free software, meaning as a whole they are not free. There are a few that are entirely free software. Those are the ones that respect your freedom. We have a list of them in gnu.org/distros. We also there describe for the well-known non-free distros, roughly in very general terms, how they are non-free. The non-free distros have a considerable negative effect on our community. Partly, well, directly, of course, because when users install those, they almost always get non-free software, and then they might have thought that they had reached freedom, but they didn't really. However, there's a deeper general harmful effect, which is that these distros, in the accompanying publicity and text, generally don't talk about freedom as something important. For instance, look at Ubuntu. The developers of Ubuntu could say, you deserve freedom in your computing and you won't get it from us. But of course, they don't say that. They don't talk about freedom at all. They don't say free software. Instead, they say, we try to give you the best possible user experience, meaning that they are trying to teach people to value convenience and not freedom. How do we teach values? By basing our words and our actions on those values. The words and the actions of Ubuntu are not based on freedom as a value. They ignore it completely, and thus they teach people not to value it, which is the exact opposite of what the free software movement needs. The most important thing for us to do to win freedom and spread freedom is to teach more people to appreciate and demand freedom. So the non-free distros are an obstacle to doing that. Now, once your system that's installed and the applications are all free software, you still have things to worry about. For instance, as you browse the web, many web pages contain programs which can be free or non-free, just like any other programs. And most of them are non-free, although some of them are free. Well, the programs in the web page get installed silently into your browser. The sun is pursuing me. And so these non-free programs get silently installed into your browser and they run in your computer, which is no good. So to prevent this, we developed the program Libre.js, which analyzes all the JavaScript programs in the web pages you visit to see if they're either trivial or free. And in those cases, it permits them to run. But if the program is non-trivial and non-free, Libre.js blocks it and informs you on the screen. It does one other thing. It searches heuristically through the site for where and how to contact the webmasters so you can send a complaint very quickly. Please do send a complaint. It's important for the webmasters to get pressure to fix their sites. There's another way you can lose control. Another way you can lose control of your computing, and that is if it's not done on your computer. This is known as SaaS, Service as a Software Substitute, meaning entrusting your own computing activity to somebody else's server. Which means how it's done is controlled by the server operator and not by you. So it used to be the way to lose control of your computing activity was to do it with a non-free program. You would have a copy of the program in your computer, the computing would be done in your computer, but since it's a non-free program, you wouldn't control how it does that computing, you wouldn't control your own computing activity. And people still do lose control of their computing that way, but now there's another way, which is service as a software substitute, which means the user has to send all the pertinent data to the server, then the computing is done in the server by programs chosen by the server operator that the user can't see or touch, and then it sends the result back to the user or takes action directly for the user. And either way, the user doesn't control what it's doing. So they both lead to the same result, that the user doesn't control her computing, and that's not right. So SaaS is inherently equivalent to running a non-free program, but it's even worse. I've told you about how many non-free programs snoop on the user, like Windows and sometimes Mac OS and iThings and Flash Player and portable phones and the Amazon swindle. Well, with SaaS, service as a software substitute, the user has to send all the pertinent data to a server, which is equivalent. You know, it's not the program sending your data to a server, it's you send the data to a server, but either way the server has your data. But it's even worse. I explained how many proprietary programs have a universal backdoor or something close to one, which enables somebody remotely to change how the user's computing gets done without asking permission to change it. Well, with SAS, the server operator can at any time install different software and thus change how computing gets done in that server. And of course, the server operator should be able to do this as the owner of that computer. But the problem is when that computer is used for SAS, that is doing other people's computing, changing that software changes how those other people's computing gets done without asking them for permission to change it. So SAS is inherently equivalent to a proprietary program which snoops on the user and has a universal backdoor. Trying to see if I can escape over here now.
You want to go over here and I can press the button to change the channel?
I can press the button here. So, for your freedom's sake, avoid SAS. I should say a little bit about free software licensing. Everything that's written in the US and most countries is automatically copyrighted. And copyright law, by default, denies users the 4 freedoms. So a program that's just written down and handed out to people, by default, is non-free. The only way to make it free is with a declaration from the copyright holders giving users the 4 freedoms. We call that declaration a free software license. Its purpose is to give users the freedoms they ought to have. It's not the same kind of thing as a proprietary software license, which is actually a contract intended to take away even more of the user's freedom. The free software license is what makes the program free. Without that, it's not free. It's absolutely essential. One of the harmful effects of GitHub is that it leads people to publish programs with no license. They're non-free software. It's a very bad thing that GitHub is leading them to do. Please, if you know anyone who does this, please explain that this is not good. They're saying, here's some non-free source code. You can look at it, but you shouldn't really use it. And they probably don't know that that's what they're doing. And this is part of the reason that we released a week or so ago ethical criteria for software repositories. Now, there are many different free software licenses, but there are 2 big categories. There's copyleft and non-copyleft. Copyleft is a condition that we put on freedoms 2 and 3. We say, you can make copies and give them away or sell them, but whatever you redistribute must come with the same freedoms as what you got. So you have to provide source code. You have to redistribute under the same license. Basically, copyleft requires the middlemen, the intermediaries, those who get the code from us, to respect other users' freedom just as we respected their freedom. Copyleft says you can redistribute this in the ethical way, but you may not strip off the freedom and turn our code into proprietary software. I had the idea for copyleft in 1985 when I first had a piece of GNU software that was interesting enough to be worth releasing. That was gnu+linux. And I implemented in a license that eventually became known as the GNU General Public License. But there are other free software licenses which don't do copyleft. I call them weak pushover licenses. For instance, there are two different BSD licenses. They're different in an important way, but they're both non-copyleft, in other words, weak licenses. And then there are a couple of different licenses that some people call the MIT license, but they're not the same. They're the expat license and the X11 license. They're both weak licenses, and there's Apache and many more. And they're different in some details, but they all permit making proprietary versions of the code. Well, the programs under those licenses are still free software. It's not bad to release a program that way, but in most cases you could do more good by releasing it under copyleft. So, we all want freedom, but there are obstacles. For instance, the companies that have subjugated people through non-free software have made lots of money that way, and they use that money to stop people from getting out, or make it hard. Sometimes they donate gratis licenses to schools, libraries, and other institutions. They have designers who make the products look very chic and thus put social pressure on people to be subjugated by those products. So when those companies show up, we should picket them. For instance, if they show up at your school to recruit people, to sell things, picket them. It's a great opportunity to teach people the ugly side of what they are doing. Another obstacle is the term open source. You'll notice I don't use that term. I don't use the word, quote, open, unquote. And the reason is I want to do everything I can to focus attention on freedom. The term, quote, open source, unquote, was coined in 1998 by people who were in the free software community. They really participated using, distributing, or developing free software, but they didn't agree with the ethical ideas of the free software movement. They coined this term so that they could talk about the same software without raising it as an ethical issue. The term, quote, open source, unquote, had never been used in our field, so they had the opportunity to choose which ideas to associate it with and which ideas to omit. From their new discourse, they omitted the entire ethical level of free software. They presented it as purely a practical convenience issue, resting on no values deeper than convenience. So, where we say if you develop and distribute a program, it's your moral duty to respect the user's freedom to change it and redistribute it, open source supporters would say if you develop and distribute a program, it might be in your practical interest to let the users change and modify it and redistribute it, because then they'll improve the code quality. So for us, the values are freedom and community. For them, code quality. You see that at the deepest level, there's a tremendous gaping gulf between free software and open source. But at the practical level, they're almost equivalent. Not 100% though, because they have a different definition and interpreted it differently, so they didn't end up drawing the line at exactly the same point we did. There are quite a few licenses that they accepted which we rejected because they restricted users in unacceptable ways. Fortunately, they are rarely used. I only know of one program which is under such a license. Chances are you've never seen one, at least not in source code. Because there's one other practical difference between free software and open source. There are devices which come with an executable made from free source code, but the device is checked for signatures, and if the user puts in a modified program, the device won't run or won't run properly. This is known as TiVoization, and it's done in some Android devices with Linux, which is the kernel used in Android as well as in gnu+linux. It's the only thing gnu+linux and Android have in common in software is Linux. Well, the source code of Linux in those versions is available to the users under version 2 of the GNU General Public License. The users can change the source code and compile it and put that modified Linux into a modified Android in those devices, and then it won't work. Because those devices won't run the user's modified executable. Which means that practically speaking, those executables are non-free software. Although the source code is free, the executable is not. Well, open source doesn't look at this question. It only asks about the source code. So we say that executable is non-free, and open source people say it's an open source program because the GNU GPL is an open source license according to them. And that's the main practical difference, the most important practical difference. So at the practical level, they're not 100% equivalent, they're more like 99.9% equivalent. But at the level of philosophy, they're as different as you can get. And people promoting open source are not helping us teach people to value their own freedom. Well, in 1998, the majority of the community supported open source, and almost all the businesses started saying open source. The politicians and journalists followed them, and since then, in the major media, all you see is open source. We have to work very hard to teach people that there is still a free software movement. Maybe they didn't know there ever was one. 15 years ago, often they described free software as a precursor to open source. That was no fun. But they've been very effective at misleading people. Most people who've heard of me think I advocate open source. Every week I get messages from people saying how much they love my contributions to open source. Because then I have to find a way to make them do a double take and set them straight without offending them. It's not easy. But I've seen even worse, articles that call me the father of open source. So I sent a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I explain about the free software movement and its ethical ideas, and that's the main point of the letter. So the people who read the article will see what was missing in the article, and it will correct the misinformation. But I like starting with a joke. Well, I do this quite a bit, but I can't do enough. We need your help. You can help us simply by not mentioning open source, except to say how it's different once in a while, just as I do. I also avoid the terms FOSS and floss. The term floss was coined, it means free/Libra and open source software. It was coined by somebody who wanted to do a study of the community's development practices, who didn't want to take sides between these two philosophies. And as a way of being neutral, it's okay. FOSS, which stands for free and open source software, is not as good. It's not entirely neutral, because open source is sitting there in the middle, easy to see. Free software is split apart. It doesn't have anything to explain that free means freedom, so people are likely to think it means gratis. So really, that's not a good term to use, even if you want to be neutral. If you want to be neutral, use floss. I'm sure your dentist will agree. But if you support the ethical ideas of the free software movement, then don't say things that are neutral. Say things that support our movement. Say free Libra software. And leave it to the people who advocate open source to say that. Why should we help advocate their views that reject our ethical concerns? Another obstacle is from hardware whose specs are secret. They want to sell you the product, but they won't tell you how you can use it. Instead, they say, here's a proprietary program to control it, run it, and shut up. Don't bother us. Well, we can't run it. It's non-free software. We shouldn't have it installed in our system. And in many cases, it has to be in the system so that the system can install it into the device every time you boot the machine or power it up. And that, we can't close our eyes to the fact that we've got this non-free program in the system on our disk. So what we have to do is reverse engineering, figuring out the specs and writing them down so that someone else can use them to write the free replacement for that non-free program. If you want to make an important technical contribution, reverse engineering is the way you can make the most crucial contribution. If you want to make a non-technical contribution, becoming a free software speaker is a great way to do it. We really need more people to spread the ideas that I'm spreading now. Schools should teach free software, exclusively free software, and they should also teach their students why. They should teach the civic ideas of free software and set a good example by only teaching the use of free programs. They shouldn't ever suggest that the students run a non-free program, because giving children non-free software is like giving them tobacco. It's a way to get them hooked, which is why some proprietary developers will offer gratis or cheap copies of their non-free software to schools or children, just as tobacco companies used to offer gratis cigarettes to children. In addition, schools should teach children to share knowledge. So every class should have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class, including the source code in case someone wants to learn about the software. because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, you may not bring proprietary software to this class unless it's for reverse engineering. The school must follow its own rule to set a good example. It must bring only free software to class with source code and share copies with everyone in the class that wants them, except for reverse engineering exercises. And the school should have reverse engineering exercises for some students. It should teach, when you get to college level at least, the school should teach reverse engineering because it's an important skill and it's a lucrative professional career. In addition, education is at stake. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's a proprietary program, it withholds that knowledge from the students, so it's the enemy of the spirit of education. But a free program makes its knowledge available to the students. It supports education. The school must demonstrate its loyalty to the spirit of education by saying proprietary software is not allowed on campus except for reverse engineering. Now, sad to say, our schools are going in the opposite direction. I was talking with a student today whose school requires students to use various Google services, which all require, well, except for Gmail and the search engine, they all require running non-free JavaScript code. So people should refuse to run them. In addition, this violates the student's privacy. Even making an account in the student's name with any company whatsoever is violating the student's privacy. Parents must fight against this. And those students who wish to resist proprietary software in their schools, they will learn something much more important than what the schools are planning to teach them. They will learn how to be champions of freedom and democracy, the kind of people that we need. Nowadays, well, human rights depend on each other. If you lose any human right, it becomes harder to defend the others. Nowadays, since we use software to do many important things, free software, in other words, control over your computing, has become one of the essential human rights that we need to defend the others. We must insist on this, campaign for this, and not accept a proprietary program as a solution, because a proprietary program is the problem. Sometimes this requires a sacrifice. Freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice. That's been true for a long, long time. Fortunately, in our field, the sacrifices are not very large. They're more inconveniences where they require you not to go along with social pressure. And there are people, you'll see these people, when you suggest that they switch to a free program, they'll say, it doesn't have this feature I like. When you can provide me with a free program that has absolutely all the features that I want, is just as convenient as this non-free program I use now, and basically won't require any sacrifice at all, then I'll switch to it. Could I have some more hot water? So what those people are saying, in effect, is the value they give to freedom is zero, because the size of the sacrifice they would make for freedom is zero. You can't change their mind, but you can point out what underlies their thoughts, and it will help make other people think. So how can you help? You can write free software if you're skilled in programming. You can become a free software activist and help organize activities to spread the ideas of the free software movement and direct them at institutions. You can persuade schools and governments to move to free software. If you're an expert at using gnu+linux, you can help other users, perhaps in a gnu+linux user group. And just saying free software is, especially when you're in a discussion with others, let's say open source, is an important way of helping us. There are other ways too. Look at gnu.org/help for more suggestions. See what fits your skills. You can join the Free Software Foundation. In fact, you can do it at the Free Software Foundation's table at the main center of this event, or you can do it through fsf.org. We need your support. We would like to hire more staff, but to do that, we need more members. There's more you can find in gnu.org. gnu.org/distros describes the free distros and says something about the non-free ones. gnu.org/licenses gives information about licenses, which ones are free, which ones are non-free, and of the free licenses, what their advantages and disadvantages are. There's also the page license recommendations.html, which suggests which license to use in various conditions for various kinds of works. There's also gnu.org/philosophy, which has dozens of articles addressing various political and philosophical questions related to free software. And there's also gnu.org/gnu, which describes the history of the GNU project, which is the development of the GNU operating system. And there's more as well. In fsf.org, you will see some resources you can use for using, distributing, and developing free software. You'll also find political campaigns you can support. You'll find our shop. You'll find a donation page and a membership page. So now it's time to present my other identity. I am Saint Ignatius of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as an extensible text editor I had written, which developed over the years into a way of life for many users, as it was extended so much they could do all their computing without ever leaving Emacs. Then it became a church with the launch of the newsgroup alt.religion.emacs, which you might find amusing to visit. And I believe my editor daughter is here. Are you still here? Hi. Someone asked me if I would be her godfather, and I said, in the Church of Emacs, we don't have gods, we have an editor. So I'm her editor father. I've only seen her a few times. So, that's all. In the Church of Emacs, we have a great schism between several versions of Emacs, and we also have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor, Emacs. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must recite the Confession of the Faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then, if you become a true expert, you can celebrate that with our ceremony, the Fu Bar Mitzvah, in which you chant a portion of our sacred scriptures, that is to say, the system source code. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs, which refers to anyone that has never used Emacs. And according to the Church of Emacs, offering the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. There is a breakaway Tibetan sect which claims that it's sufficient to invoke them automatically under the control of the script, but the Mother Church holds that to gain spiritual merit, you must type them by hand. The Church of Emacs has certain advantages compared with other churches I won't name. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy. But it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever evil proprietary operating systems have possessed computers under your control or are set up for your regular use, and then install a wholly free operating system, and then use and install exclusively free software with and on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint, and you have the right to wear a halo if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. There is a traditional rivalry between Emacs and the other editor, VI. So people have occasionally asked whether in the Church of Emacs it is a sin to use VI. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast. But using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. Last year I went to China, and I was shocked to find out that some VI users had proposed getting together to attack me. What can I say? Apparently violence begins with VI. People have occasionally asked me whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is no computer disk, this is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous existence. So, thank you.